Have you ever wondered why perfectly rational, put-together people will suddenly just throw their entire lives away for a doomed romance? Well, in this explainer, we're jumping right into the deep end to figure that out. We're going to unravel the dark, intertwining worlds of classic literature, early cinema, and psychoanalysis to decode the human mind. We're exploring the psychology of passion, the anatomy of absolute obsession, and that devastating fall into melancholia. I can promise you, by the time we wrap up, you're going to look at love, loss, and your own ego in a completely different light. To really set the stage here, imagine for a second that love isn't some magical fairy tale. That was the rather pessimistic worldview of author W. Somerset Maugham, who was heavily influenced by the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. They looked at romantic love and essentially saw a destructive, irrational trap. To them, it was just a biological trick played on us by nature simply to foster procreation. And the scary part, once that trap snaps shut, reason just goes entirely out the window. It's a pretty sobering thought, right? That something society constantly celebrates could actually be the very thing that undoes us. So that brings us to the big psychological mystery we're trying to solve today. Why do we fall for destructive passion? Why do individuals who are otherwise disciplined, successful, and incredibly logical find themselves just completely consumed by attachments that they know, at least on some level, are going to ruin them? To find the answer to that, we have to look past the surface of conscious thought and really dig into the deep and honestly often uncomfortable architecture of the unconscious mind. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, Freud's Psychology of Love, Navigating the Currents. To really understand this descent into irrational passion, we have to turn to Sigmund Freud. In a series of papers he wrote between 1910 and 1918, he proposed that our capacity for love isn't just one simple emotion. It's actually a complex collision of two distinct psychological currents. First up, you have the affectionate current. This one is the older of the two. It develops in early childhood, it's directed at our primary caretakers, and it's safe, warm, and familiar. But then, right around puberty, the sensual current emerges. And this is a raw, instinctual, erotic drive. Now, ideally, a person merges these two currents together as an adult. But Freud pointed out that for a lot of people, these currents end up clashing because of societal rules or deep-rooted anxieties. And when that happens, the sensual current gets repressed and pushed off course. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When this sensual current gets diverted by societal prohibitions, it essentially goes rogue. Freud realized that when this drive can't safely attach to a respectable, affectionate figure, it turns towards subversive or socially degraded objects. Writing in 1912, he explained that this is exactly why some men seek out women who have, quote, something of the prostitute about them. The person often builds up this whole fantasy that they need to rescue the object of their affection, but in reality, they're just playing out a repetitive, unconscious cycle that is pretty much guaranteed to end in disappointment. You can actually see this exact concept perfectly visualized in the classic 1930 Weimar Republic film, The Blue Angel. There's this fantastic moment where a working-class maid actually pauses her chores to mimic the defiant, unapologetically sensual pose of a cabaret singer named Lola on a poster. It's such a brilliant illustration of the intoxicating, subversive power of that sensual current. It's this massive force that completely disrupts rigid, polite society. It beckons with an allure that just demands to be noticed, totally overriding any sense of duty or propriety. And it's definitely not just the working class who are captivated by this. Even a stern policeman, a literal pillar of authority and discipline, is completely mesmerized by that exact same subversive poster. The sensual current really doesn't care about your job title or your social standing or how put together you seem. When rigid discipline meets raw, unapologetic sensuality, the result is almost always catastrophic. Moving on to Section 2, the anatomy's obsession, case studies in ruin. To see how this psychoanalytic theory operates out in the wild, we should look at W. Somerset Maugham's masterpiece of human bondage. The main character, Philip Carey, is a highly sensitive, solitary orphan with a clubfoot. He really doesn't have much of a grasp on how the world works. And yet, he finds himself inexplicably, and honestly irrationally drawn to a waitress named Mildred Rogers, whom Maugham describes as common and venal. Philip endures just endless humiliation. He literally squanders his money and his dignity on a woman who offers him absolutely zero genuine passion in return. He's entirely trapped by his own unconscious drives, bound to a person who actively degrades him.
Our second case study brings us back to the movies. Let me introduce you to Professor Emmanuel Roth from The Blue Angel. The year is 1924, and he is a highly respectable, incredibly stern English teacher. Honestly, he's a bit of a petty tyrant in his classroom. His entire existence is defined by strict routine, discipline, and authority. But that secure, boring little life gets completely shattered when he finds out his mischievous students have been passing around photos of the cabaret singer Lola. He marches down to the sleazy Blue Angel nightclub to confront her, but instead, he falls entirely under her spell.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because Rath's downfall is terrifyingly swift and absolute. He starts in 1924 as this highly respected high school teacher. Overcome by his obsession, he stubbornly refuses to end the affair, so of course he gets fired. Fast forward just 5 years to 1929. This once proud academic is now reduced to peddling Lola's photo postcards in the nightclub, just so he can stay near her. His descent culminates in a public humiliation so profound that it literally costs him his life. This timeline right here is the ultimate roadmap of the sensual current destroying a man's life.
All right, section 3, the fall into melancholia, where the ego collapses.
So what is actually happening inside someone's mind when they lose everything to this kind of destructive attachment? We're shifting now into the crash phase of our psychological journey. In his landmark 1917 essay, Mourning and Melancholia, Freud pointed out an absolutely crucial difference. Normal mourning is incredibly painful, yes, but eventually the mind accepts the reality of the loss. The emotional energy, the libido, is slowly redirected back outward into the world. But melancholia, which is very closely related to what we'd now call depression, is a totally different beast. In melancholia, the individual internalizes the loss. They turn all that pain, anger, and ambivalence completely inward on themselves, and that leads to intense self-reproach and a devastating, complete loss of self-regard.
And this brings us to one of Freud's most haunting poetic realizations. The shadow of the object fell upon the ego. Think about that for a second. When the melancholic person loses someone, or realizes the person they are obsessed with doesn't actually love them back, they unconsciously swallow that lost, ambivalent object and take it inside themselves. They identify with it. So instead of letting go, their own mind becomes this private, internal battleground where they just endlessly punish themselves on behalf of the person who hurt them.
You can literally see the visual cost of this melancholic identification in Professor Rath. Look at this. The authoritative ego of the stern teacher on the left has completely vanished. Coerced into performing in his own hometown, Rath has been transformed into this tormented, grotesque, august clown on the right. He has completely debased himself. His ego hasn't just been damaged, it has entirely collapsed into the degraded object of his obsession.
Which leads us to the harrowing finale of The Blue Angel. Rath is forced out on stage as a clown, literally having eggs smashed on his head by the troupe. But the final break with reality happens when he looks out and sees Lola openly embracing her new lover, Mazeppa the strongman. Driven completely insane by this agonizing loss, Rath just goes berserk. He actually starts crowing like a rooster, which is this horrifying, distorted echo of his previously misguided masculinity. He has to be subdued in a straitjacket. Later, he wanders back to his old classroom in the dead of night and dies clutching his old school desk. It is the lethal ultimate conclusion of a profound melancholia. Which brings us to our final section, meaning within the pattern, moving with grief.
Okay, that is a heavy, tragic end for sure. But is that our only option when we're faced with a devastating loss or an obsession? Thankfully, no. Modern psychodynamic therapy builds on Freud's ideas to offer us a way out of this melancholic trap. The goal here isn't to rush to fix the pain or just tell someone to get over it. Instead, it requires us to honestly confront those internal conflicts, the anger, the shame, the profound disappointment we feel towards the object of our passion. By doing this work, we can begin to untangle those knotted threads of identification. We stop mimicking the lost object. We stop turning our hatred inward. And instead, we learn to move with the grief, integrating the wounds, the contradictions, and the joys into a much fuller, healthier sense of self. And interestingly, this totally mirrors the profound existential realization that Philip Carey eventually reaches in Of Human Bondage. After years of suffering, Philip figures out the metaphorical secret of a Persian rug he was once given. He realizes that life doesn't actually have an inherent pre-written meaning. The universe is just indifferent. But that's actually incredibly liberating. We are the weavers of our own life's design. The suffering, the destructive passions, the deep pain, and the moments of profound happiness, these are all just different colored strands, and we have the power to weave them together into a beautiful, complex pattern of our own choosing.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. We are all going to experience loss at some point, and we are all susceptible to the irrational pull of passion. But when the scaffolding of your world shakes, you have a choice. Will you let the shadow of the object fall upon your ego and completely define you? Or will you take those tangled strands of pain and joy and weave your very own deliberate pattern? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Take that question with you, and as always, keep learning.